To coincide with Armistice Day on the 11th of November 2025, 8 former 4-star generals and an Air Chief Marshal published an open letter to Sir Keir Starmer and his government in the Times. They accused the Prime Minister of allowing the European Convention of Human Rights to undermine the effectiveness of Britain's armed forces. The generals argued that the government's Northern Ireland Troubles Bill, if enacted, would undermine and erode the moral contract between the state and those who serve the state, and accused the government ministers of blurring the lines between legitimate authority and illegitimate violence. The collapse of faith in our nation's legal system is stripping troops of their fighting edge and constitutes a direct threat to national security. On the 18th of November, the Troubles Bill passed its second reading in Westminster. Former Parachute Regiment Lieutenant Colonel Simon Barry flew from South Africa for the debate. Justiceforveterans.uk caught up with him to talk about that letter, what he did before the debate, and what he witnessed in the House of Commons. This is the Justiceforveterans.uk One More Mission podcast. Simon, it's been quite a tumultuous week. Perhaps we could start with what you thought when you read the General's letter.
Well, I think it was maybe a little bit overdue, but I think it was amazing that 9 4-stars, of whom one was a very, very good Royal Air Force officer I actually know quite well as well, actually laid it out in really clear black and white terms what this actually means. And they're people who have run their services. They're people who are effectively responsible for the delivery of the military capability, the fighting power, call it what you will, which is based around people to achieve the nation's objectives on a campaign, on the battlefield, or wherever it is going to be. The critical element of that fighting power is what they call the moral component, which is the people, the troops. And, you know, as generals, they all come from an ethos where they're responsible for their men, and they feel that the time has come for someone, indeed 9 of them, to stand up and exercise that responsibility, because the government is clearly failing to do so, and one is increasingly tempted to believe that they don't actually see why they should do so, or see any moral requirement to do so upon the altar of whatever political, and I don't think it's necessarily internal politics. I think it's political in a slightly wider and more sinister way. So I think the generals are really trying to bring the government back on track. You know, you have your army, which is loyal to the country, which you send to do things on behalf of the country, and you put them in harm's way, and therefore you have a moral responsibility to look after them in a way that you don't have to look after their enemies. And I think that's pretty clear to most people, although maybe not to some people.
So they've been very clear about wanting to remain apolitical, and as do most veterans, you know, many of them come from red wall seats. Many of them are from traditional Labor families. So, of course, they want to keep it apolitical, but it's hard to see how that can be a course you can take with what is shaping up to be not a troubles bill, but a troublesome bill.
I think all of us, particularly at the beginning, were of the view that we wanted to play this absolutely straight. And I think we are playing it absolutely straight. How people position themselves around us is very much for them. We have been very clear from the beginning, you know, since the genesis of the 2023 Legacy Act and so on, that we felt that was the best you're going to get. And so when the new government came in and decided that for whatever reason, and made a manifesto commitment that it was going to repeal it, we don't know why. Because we don't accept the arguments. We've refuted pretty much every argument they've come out with. But they're hell-bent on doing this. And so that kind of turns them into the opposition by their own choice. They have chosen the course of action that they are taking, and that course of action involves a full betrayal of veterans. And therefore, politics being what it is and adversarial, there are others standing up who are saying, particularly, on the other side of the house, where there are far more people with real military experience, particularly in Northern Ireland, which is a bit missing from the government benches, who are prepared to stand up and say, I actually know a lot more about this than you lot do, and this is why. And this is why I think it's wrong. And a lot of them come from Tory constituencies, but equally somebody like Sarah Potchin, who I think on Tuesday spoke particularly well. And let's not forget that she also is an MP in Cheshire, just next door to Warrington, just to remind people that this wasn't just about stuff going on in Belfast or the fields of South Armagh. These people were murdering men, women, children on Saturday afternoons in cities and towns across England. So let's not forget that. But yes, I think we're in a bit of a, who's on my side, who isn't on my side. They have chosen their sides, and so we have to accept the sides that have been chosen. But ultimately, we really did want to remain apolitical because that's the nature of the armed forces. Our loyalty, our oath of loyalty, is not to the government. Our oath of loyalty is to the monarch as the head of the state, which is great because it means that we are not having to be loyal to anything that's remotely political. We're loyal to a constitutional monarchy, and that's really important for most of us because it means we're kept out of that political mire. But now that political mire is gathering around our feet, thanks to this current government, and we have to do something to get out of it.
So we had the second reading of the bill, created such a concern in your heart that you flew 6,500 miles from South Africa to be there. When you got to Westminster, what did you get up to in Westminster, particularly before you went in to listen to the debate?
I speak to you in here as Keir Starmer is sitting in South Africa. Isn't that ironic? Anyway, well, we had a number of things. I had an interview with Bob Parr on GB News, which I hope helped lay things out for people. And it's all about really trying to explain to people what it's all about. All this ended nearly 30 years ago. 25 years ago. And so a lot of people today don't really understand it, and they don't understand the terminology. Calling it the Troubles is a little bit of an understatement to what was an armed insurrection. It wasn't a glorified domestic argument down the Crumlin Road, I'll tell you that. More people died, more soldiers died in Northern Ireland than were killed in Afghanistan and Iraq put together. And that's before you get to the UDR and you get to the police. So we had the thing on Saturday, and then on Monday evening, very kindly, one of the Labour MPs, who used to be a reservist in the Parachute Regiment, held a meeting in a committee room in the House of Commons on Monday evening, really to allow mainly regimental associations, but anybody from other organisations, but mainly Parachute Regiment veterans, to come and discuss things with him. And he'd got Louise Sanders-Jones, the Veterans Minister, with him, Al Carnes, and also the Ruth, whose name escapes me, the lady from the House of Lords, who appeared occasionally. On our side, we had General Defar Hockley, who was particularly concerned about the implications for the future and the Overseas Operations Act. Me, and pretty much a lot of the regional secretaries and branch secretaries and the national secretary of the Parachute Regiment Associations, other veterans who wanted to come and join us and who are extremely welcome, and we value their participation with us, and they're in the tent, if you like. And a lot of the guys, because this has become something that Tommy Atkins feels particularly strongly about. And, 95% of the guys, padding the streets, the fields and all that of Northern Ireland were young lads, 18, 19-year-old working class blokes. And, they're the people who are being sort of sometimes even vilified. So anyway, we had the usual bromides from the politicians, but I thank Mayo, the MP for Southend, who actually put it together. I think he did it with the best of intentions. We were assured that they had our backs. Louise Sanders-Jones didn't actually say a word throughout the whole proceedings, although she is the Veterans Minister. But Al Khan's was very, attempted to be very reassuring and took questions and so on. And questions from people who had a lot of skin in this game. So, for instance, Terry Wood, who, is a regional secretary for the London branch. His brother was killed at Warren Point. He then joined two paras, served in the Falklands and in Northern Ireland. So he's both a victim and a veteran. And he is very, very concerned at the way this is going. And he can speak from 2 points of view, which nobody else can. And he has got, and he said to all of them sitting in front of us, that he had no faith whatsoever in ever getting closure because of the way things had been going on since 1979. It's not suddenly going to change, and any policeman will tell you that. And then at the end of it, we sort of broke, and we were given all the the assurances that we're looking after you, we've got your back, and so on. And then on Tuesday, we had some meetings. We had a press conference with Marc Francois in Westminster, a group of us that just opened to the press, which was very useful. And then we prepared and we traipsed down to the House. And it was my first time actually in the House of Commons during a debate, having seen it on the television before, but never actually having been there. It was an amazing experience. It was a disappointing experience. I felt that Hilary Benn, who is the man obviously fronting all this, he was uninspiring, but equally had a little sort of determination in his demeanour, basically saying, it's going to happen, so it's going to happen. And then, other ministers, Healy was there at the beginning, he went very quickly, Carnes came and went, Sandra Jones only turned up at the end. So it shows it was very much a Northern Ireland office-driven thing. A number of the members of the Conservative Party, particularly the Andrew Bridgen, the shadow Northern Ireland secretary, spoke extremely well and laid the case out yet again, and he was pretty much ignored yet again, even though his points, frankly, are irrefutable. We then had the normal, jack-in-the-box set of pre-programmed MPs on the government benches who sort of popped up to say, that this was the previous act was terrible and unlawful and blah, 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 even though it isn't, and we've proved that. And then we had others who, in a rather sort of sickly way, stood up to say how, they'd seen names on memorials or they knew a victim and this was all going to be wonderful. And, all of a sudden, after 25 years, someone was going to shine a light and Inspector Clouseau would appear and tie it all up. Frankly, none of us in the gallery were falling for any of that nonsense. But what was then even worse is that we had a number of what you would call ad hominem attacks on the parachute regiment. One from the SDLP, which is, I suppose, it's all in Hansard, which I suppose is predictable. But even more concerning, one from Liam Conlon, who, for those who don't know, is the son of Sue Gray, who used to be Starmer's Chief of Staff. Now, in a previous life, Sue Gray lived in Newry, around Newry, ran a bar around Newry, and you may wish to speculate what the clientele of that bar may be. And Liam Conlon stood up to talk about an incident that involved the parachute regiment in Ballymurphy. It was an interesting account of that incident, but he went on and on about it. So we had two really quite personal attacks on the parachute regiment. But the interesting thing with Liam Conlon is that he talked about this thing that happened way away from his constituency, and yet just down the road from his constituency is Kingsmills, where the biggest massacre by gunfire in the whole of the insurrection called the Troubles took place. He didn't mention it once. It's never been solved. So one has to say, were they the wrong sort of victims? Nobody seems to care about the Kingsmills massacre because they were Protestants, because it was the boys in the RA, our freedom-fighting IRA guys, who actually went and did it. So look at that in the context of their pronouncements about no vexatious prosecutions. It is perfectly clear from what the government's own MPs have said that they are out to get both the SAS, Lochgall and so on, and the parachute regiment. They have been perfectly clear on that. So the chances of not having vexatious prosecutions are significantly less with what the Labour government is now proposing than it is with the existing legacy bill. And let's not forget that, when it comes down to law and order and policing and all that sort of stuff, who better than some very experienced policemen? And let's also remember that the very experienced policemen of the RUC lived this. They lived it every day of their life. They suffered grievously. They were fantastic people by and large, and I have the greatest respect of them, and I think most of us do. They reluctantly concluded when Johnny Mercer was putting that bill together that, although they didn't like it, that frankly there was no chance of any effective prosecution now of the IRA, the people who did 90% of the killing. And therefore the only people in the frame would be soldiers and policemen. So reluctantly, but based upon bitter experience on their part, they know what they're talking about better than anybody else, and certainly better than any politician. They concluded that the 2023 Legacy Act was the best way to draw a line under this and prevent any further vexatious prosecutions of people and more distress. And let's just be honest and draw a line and move on. They have now been ignored by the Northern Ireland office and the usual suspects, and one has to ask why.
A lot of people, including you, talk about vexatious prosecutions, but that's only part of the problem. The fact is that what this bill does and what the government's plans are is to reopen inquests, inquiries, investigations, which, it is a long precursor to any sort of criminal prosecution. And as a result, the process becomes the punishment for veterans.
Absolutely. And that's been said so often, and it was said to the ministers on Monday night. It was said again during the debate several times on Tuesday, and both times it was effectively ignored. There is something wider in play here now, and I think we've all been thinking about it, and we've all joined the dots, looked at the photographs, and really concluded from the evidence that this is all about the relationship with the Republic of Ireland and also their proxies in Sinn Féin. So the ulterior motive is to do with the Republic of Ireland through Sinn Féin. Why? Well, by and large, our view really formed in the last few weeks is that it probably has something to do with the EU. Why else would you want to get into bed with a state that for 30-odd years was complicit in the vast majority of the thousands of killings by the IRA, both in Northern Ireland and even more so on mainland Britain? I mean, it is absolutely crazy, but there must be a reason for this. You don't have this as a manifesto commitment when you think that it just might be tidying something up that doesn't need tidying up. It is extremely suspicious. And I think a lot of us now feel that we are now pawns in this game. And so having done what we've done and served our country loyally, we are now about to be flung onto a pyre by a government that actually wants to use us as a bargaining chip to achieve in other political ways what it couldn't achieve in a referendum or the ballot box or anything like that. And the idea that the investigations are going to be involving the government of a country complicit in these terrorist acts, whether it was blowing women and kids to pieces in places in Britain or blowing women and kids to pieces in Enniskillen, Omagh and other places, is actually revolting, frankly. As somebody said, it's a bit like getting the Cray twins to investigate Scotland Yard. It's as logical as that. And so we do feel that our betrayal is part of a much wider picture. And also maybe that there are a lot of people around who feel that, organisations like the SAS and the Parachute Regiment are too good at what they do. And therefore, maybe getting in the way of whatever they want to do. And maybe we won't go on. We don't want them. Maybe we will sort of do something about them in the process. And that indeed in itself is extremely disconcerting when one thinks of what might be round the corner. Who are you going to send? Who's going to go and sort it all out? Well, if you've got rid of the guys who are going to go and sort it out, how are you going to sort it out? Because a stiff letter or a, focus group ain't going to cut it. And that's kind of where we are.
You mentioned the photograph there. Just walk me through that photograph.
The photograph of Hilary Benn and Simon Harris in the very cheesy sort of, even better than Neville Chamberlain, I would say, standing there with the sort of copies of something that they have signed, and there's whoever is Harris's, number 2 standing beside him. Then there's Harris with a big cheesy grin. Then there's the tricolour behind them. Then there's a European Union flag, and then there's a Union flag behind Hilary Benn, looking a little startled, and then a rather smug-looking MP private secretary standing beside Hilary Benn. And they're definitely very pleased with themselves. And when somebody who has been effectively aiding and abetting your enemy is standing there with a government minister looking very pleased with himself, it doesn't engender a hell of a lot of confidence in people like us. And indeed, it shouldn't engender a lot of confidence in most people in this country. What are they smiling at? I think that's a question we need to find the answer to. It's really important.
Starmer has finally come out and said something. It's far from a personal intervention as has been asked for. He's basically just shrugged things off. What's your take on that?
This has been going on long enough now that we frankly need a bit of clear leadership, and we're not getting it. Talk to the minister, talk to this, talk to that. Well, none of that's working. So why, the definition of insanity, why continue a course of action that is plainly not even being listened to, let alone heard? Now, we also need to remember that there's a continuing factor in this from the Blair years forward to here. Now, the Blair years gave us the Good Friday Agreement and everybody patting themselves on the back. It also gave us pardons, amnesties for terrorists, for killers, and also the Great Comfort Letters, all at the end of a bombing campaign that the IRA had pushed until it got what it wanted, even after the Good Friday Agreement. And so now you've got Jonathan Powell back in number 10, and he is the man who really was the architect of the appeasement of the IRA. And so if you're continuing a process of appeasement to Sinn Féin and the Republic of Ireland, that does not come from the Ministry of Defence. It comes through the Northern Ireland office, I think would be fair to say, but it comes from number 10. Now, Powell is not an elected man. He is an appointed advisor, so he can be as sort of political as he likes because he's appointed. He's not a member of the civil service or whatever, I don't think, anyway. So now that comes back into number 10. This is a number 10 issue, and who is the man in charge? Who is the man in number 10? It is the Prime Minister. And the constitutional implications of what is being done are significant. And also the fact that the language being used is also maybe deliberately misleading. The Act, as it stands, is not unlawful. And yet the Prime Minister last week or the week before said it was. It is not. It's the act of a sovereign parliament, approved by the government's chief law officer of the day. A judge in Northern Ireland said that it wasn't compatible with some part of ECHR. So be it. The government had started to appeal that to the Supreme Court. And then with the election, the change of government, this government, for reasons we don't know, but may speculate, decided not to continue that appeal. But the Act is not illegal, unlawful, or anything else. Indeed, we have asked on Monday night, we asked them for two things, actually, so I'll tell you what they are. One, please give us the proper judgment definition of what is the problem with this Act, because it is not illegal or unlawful. They also call it illogical. Don't know how you work out whether that's, well found or not. And we haven't had a reply on that. And the other one is we were told by Al Khans that the comfort letters had no basis in law. we weren't entirely convinced, because the Downey trial collapsed and because one of these letters was produced. And disingenuously, the Northern Ireland office and the MOD have both come out and said, yes, but he's still being prosecuted. Yes, he's being prosecuted for something that's unconnected with that comfort letter. The prosecution of murdering those soldiers and all those horses and the Hyde Park bomb is still not happening because of that comfort letter. So when that was mentioned on Monday night, that the comfort letters have no bearing or whatever, a former lifeguard, and they're the gang in the house in the Hyde Park bombing, who has also then spent 25 years in the Royal Ulster Constabulary, stood up and said to Al Khan's, well, if they have no substance, then rescind them. It would be a very good public gesture to show that you are listening. I also invited Dan Jarvis the following afternoon, Tuesday afternoon, as we were about to go in to the chamber, to do exactly that. I said, Dan, there is a quick win for you. Do that. And he sort of looked at me. We haven't seen anything, no result. But those were things that I think it's worth everybody knowing are on the table and no one's picking them up. But I go back to, where's it all come? Where does the buck stop? It's as simple as that. And the buck stops in number 10. This is an international issue. This is involving a sovereign government overseas and a sovereign government here, the sovereign government overseas being implicated in what happened over here. So it is more than just the Northern Ireland office. It is a matter of state. And there are constitutional implications, and the National Security Advisor is sitting in number 10, and therefore this is ultimately a number 10 issue. And so who occupies number 10? That's my answer to your question, Rob.
Just finally, one of the big things that the government has made a point of is that there was a false promise, quote unquote, of amnesty to veterans because it could never be implemented. But it was the government that stopped it being implemented. It's them that made it false, surely.
We've discussed it at length with Johnny Mercer, he is the man who drove this thing through and got it to where it was, onto the statute book. And it wasn't so much as an amnesty for veterans. It was more a statute of limitations for more than just veterans. Now, the issue now is wider than that, because this is what keeps getting thrown around. We can't have this, we can't have that. Well, hang on a minute, everybody. We've had pardons, royal pardons, we've had amnesties for terrorists, we've had comfort letters for terrorists, but oh no, we won't have anything like that for veterans. But, and they are now peddling the protections, that they call them, in the new Repeal Act as being really good. Well, there were 6 of them in the original Act. They have now become 5, interestingly, and now they don't just apply to veterans, they apply to everybody. So the new Repeal Act gives veterans nothing it doesn't give the terrorists. And if that's called protection for veterans, then, I'm obviously speaking the wrong language.
You have been listening to the One More Mission podcast. To find out more, visit justiceforveterans.uk.